Welcome back. Today, we're diving into a fascinating real-life legal showdown between a couple and their condo association. It's a story all about rules, what's fair, and that moment you realize the fine print has way more power than you ever thought possible. Let's get right into it. So let me ask you this. Imagine for years you've been paying your condo fees and it's always been based on how big your place is. Makes sense. Then, bam, out of the blue, the association flips the script. Now everyone pays the exact same amount and your bill just shot through the roof. You'd probably think, hey, I've got a case here, right? Well, that's exactly what one couple thought, and their story is a huge lesson for every single one of us.
All right, so let's meet the people at the center of this whole thing, Lee and Kim Edwards. They were homeowners at the Scottsdale Embassy Condominiums, and they found themselves locked in a pretty serious battle with their condo association over this sudden and what they felt was a totally unfair change in how their fees were being calculated.
Now get this, for over 40 years, the rule was simple. Bigger condo, bigger fee. It was all based on square footage. But then, in 2020, the board just tossed that entire system out the window. And that one decision sparked a legal fight that went all the way to a judge.
And listen, this wasn't just some angry email chain. Oh no, this was a full-blown, drawn-out legal battle. The Edwards filed their first petition in November of 2020, and it took months and months of hearings, filings, and even a request for a rehearing before a final decision finally came down in July 2021. The stakes were clearly very, very high.
So what was the Edwards case exactly? Well, on the surface, you'd have to say it looked incredibly strong. They were convinced that both the history of the community and the law itself were totally on their side. Let's walk through why they felt so confident. This chart really gets to the heart of the whole dispute. The old way was proportional. You paid for the space you had. The new way, it was just a flat, equal share. All 26 units, from the tiniest studio to the biggest penthouse, suddenly paid the exact same fee. You can see why the Edwards felt this was just completely wrong. Why should they pay the same as someone in a much larger condo? So their case really boiled down to two key arguments. First, history. Come on, for 40 years everyone did it this way. Why the sudden change? And second, and this is the big one, they pointed to the law. They argued that this new system was forcing them to pay for the upkeep of other people's private patios and their dedicated parking spots, things the law calls limited common elements. To them, it felt like a clear violation of fairness and the law.
So you're probably thinking, wow, that sounds like a slam dunk for the homeowners, right? You've got history, you've got state law on your side, so what in the world could the association's defense possibly be? Well, it was actually surprisingly simple, and it all came down to one single critical document.
And that document is the CC&Rs. Now, for anyone who lives in a community with an HOA or a condo board, you know what this is. This is the rule book. It's a legally binding contract that spells out everything, and most importantly, how the association has to operate. And this rule book, it turned out to be the key piece of evidence in this entire story.
The association's defense was, pretty straightforward. They basically said, hey, don't look at us. We're not making things up. We are just, for the first time in a while, actually following the rules that have been in our governing documents all along. It's a simple claim, but it raises a huge question. What happens when the official rule book says one thing, but everyone's been doing it another way for decades?
And this is where it all comes to a head. It's the climax of the case, really. You've got a general state law going head-to-head with a very specific community rulebook. So in this legal cage match, which one comes out on top?
Okay, so this is the state law the Edwards were hanging their hats on. It basically says that if there's an expense for something that only one unit gets to use, like a private patio, the cost for that thing should be billed only to that specific unit. Seems pretty clear, doesn't it? This was the absolute foundation of their case. And that is the central mystery here, isn't it? We have a state law that seems totally unambiguous, totally clear. So why didn't it decide the whole case? Well, the answer was hiding in plain sight, buried deep in the fine print of that community rulebook. And boom, here's the first bombshell from the rulebook. The association's own CC&Rs explicitly state that every single unit has an equal 1/26th interest in the common areas. Not a share based on size, but a fixed, equal share for everybody. This one sentence laid the groundwork for equal payments. And then came the knockout blow. Another section of that same rulebook didn't just allow for a uniform rate, it demanded it. It says assessments must be fixed at a uniform rate for all units. It's not a suggestion. And that language completely blew up the 40-year practice of charging based on square footage. So picture the judge. You've got a clear state law on one side and an equally clear, but totally contradictory, community rulebook on the other. How do you even decide that? Let's take a look at the final ruling.
And here is the crucial legal lesson for all of us. The judge ruled that because the community's own rulebook was so specific and so unambiguous, it actually overruled the state law. You can think of the state law as like a default setting. It applies everywhere, unless a community has its own, more specific rule written into its contract. In this fight, the contract won.
And so, that was it. The final decision came down. The homeowner's petition was dismissed. Despite all their powerful arguments about history and fairness, the very specific words written in their own community's rulebook meant that they lost the case. So what can we all take away from the Edwards tough experience? Okay, first, your CC&Rs are not suggestions, they are a binding legal contract. Second, those rules can sometimes be more powerful than general state laws. Third, and this is huge, the argument, but we've always done it this way, is not a legal defense. It will not hold up in court. And finally, the biggest lesson of all, you have got to read and understand the fine print before you buy.
And that leaves us with one final, really important question that I want you to think about. Whether you're a homeowner right now or you're even just thinking about it, have you actually sat down and read your association's rulebook cover to cover? Because as this case just proved, what's hiding in that fine print can make all the difference in the world.